I'm Lisa Gray, Executive Director with the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce. And I'm here today with Susan Levine, owner of Women Reshaping Lives, a counseling practice here in Simsbury. And Susan is our featured member of the month for the month of September. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the privilege and honor of being a featured member of the Simsbury Chamber.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. So, Susan, tell us why you chose the name Women Reshaping Lives for your practice. What is that about for you?
It was very personal for me. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I wanted to have a unique name. I wanted to have something that reflected my feelings about the counseling practice and what I wanted to bring to women. And so the idea of reshaping is part of my philosophy of looking at our lives as a continuum, in that we're always kind of evolving and changing, and that we don't turn into new people, but we take all of our stories, all of our history, all of the things that make us unique, and we weave them into different things. And so we literally reshape our lives. When I first began my practice, and people would look at the name and they'd wonder what it was, and they'd say, well, is this a new diet program? I would say, no, it isn't. But in some ways, it's about, shedding the pounds of messages that we have, not to become a new you, but to become someone reshaped and bringing more and more wholeness to ourselves. So the name has, proven to be very apt.
Sounds appropriate. So in your practice, you focus on helping women through transitional times and changes. What influenced you to choose that avenue?
What influenced me actually were my own life transitions, the journeys that I've had. I began my career as a music teacher and as a singer. From there, I journeyed into being a nursery school teacher for a time. And actually, in midlife, I found kind of the calling of my life in being a cantor. And I served the Farmington Valley Jewish congregation, Emek Shalom, as their cantor for 32 years. And I now am their cantor emerita. At the same time, I was a wife, a mother, caring for aging and ailing parents, lots and lots of transitions. I was fortunate to have a lot of support along the way to help me in those really tough moments. And I wanted to be able to do that as well. And even finding counseling that was an outgrowth of my wanting to meet the needs of my congregants and their problems. And from there, I actually counseled at Bethany Pastoral Counseling Services for 15 years.
Okay, so besides your experience counseling as a cantor, what other counseling background do you have?
Well, I am have a graduate degree from the University of St. Joseph, and I am Connecticut licensed professional counselor. As I mentioned, I have counseled at Bethany Pastoral Counseling Services for 15 years. Also, I have facilitated groups, emotional support groups for long-term unemployed at Jewish Family Services. I've also facilitated a group at Jewish Family Services for recovery from addiction and alcohol abuse. So I've had a nice body of experience.
So why did you decide to focus specifically on women and how they are affected by change and transition in their lives?
Women's issues have always been very personal for me. First of all, I spent a large number of years in a profession that was previously all male. So finding my woman's voice, that unique way of expressing myself, whether it was musically or in my ideas and my thoughts, was very, very important. And I think that women do struggle in trying to find that expression, finding their unique voices.
So how does a woman's approach to change differ from a man's, do you think?
I think both men and women struggle under stereotypes. Women certainly trying to be that super mom, that super person who does it all and is nurturer of all, very often to the detriment of their own needs. I think men have a different relational style and may have difficulties expressing their emotions. I gravitated towards just working with women because of how I connect with that, with how helping women with their self-beliefs and also looking at what they see all around them. You know, in our media, everywhere, there are messages that we're getting all the time about being perfect, doing it all. And that sets us up with an impossible ideal, and it makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah. So recently you spoke at a Simsbury Chamber of Commerce event about a roadmap for change. What is that roadmap?
Roadmap for change is a way of dealing with changes that come up for us, and change comes up for us all the time. And there's a wonderful quote by Neil Donald Walsh about change, and it says that life begins at the end of your comfort zone. So if you're feeling
Very
uncomfortable right now, the change taking place in your life is a beginning, not an ending. And it's realizing that it is a beginning, not an ending. But to do that, that roadmap is at first you have to recognize what you need to be letting go of in order to move on.
And that's very difficult for
yes,
some people.
it is very, very difficult. And with that, when you realize that, it's also feeling the emotions that come with that and processing those emotions.
Which a lot of people don't want to face, I think.
That is very
Sometimes,
true.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard to deal with anger, grief,
Or
overwhelm.
to feel like you're out of control, if you let those
Yes,
emotions
yes,
out. Yeah.
Yes, feeling out of control is very, very scary. So it's finding support around that. So friends, family that can be non-judgmental and support you in that. Professionals who can support you in what you are feeling so that you can process your feelings. And that's very, very important to bring self-compassion to what you are feeling, to work through that. And with that, you're actually reframing and refocusing where you've been, where you're at, and where you want to go to. And that's the roadmap for change.
And sometimes you can't move on until you allow yourself to feel those feelings and work through them.
Yes, and that's very important.
You get stuck.
And sometimes also your life view enters into this too. You know, sometimes, you know, we might be a person who sees the glass as half empty or half full. All of that plays into how we approach change.
Sure. So what is your approach typically to counseling? What is your philosophy when it comes to counseling someone?
My approach to counseling is first and foremost to create a space that is safe and trusting for someone to be able to explore who they are, their history, their beliefs, where they, want to go, what they see for themselves. So there's certainly goal setting, there's looking at where they want to travel, but it's also looking at their stories and being with them in their stories. An example, in working with a widow who has lost a spouse after 30 years of marriage and comes to me, needs that time to just have those feelings. And sometimes friends and families get worn down and especially get feeling desperate to fix grief. And grief can't be fixed. Grief has to be traveled through. So just to be there, to allow those feelings to kind of normalize them, so to speak, and to be with that client in those feelings, so that there's a holding, and that I bring a calm and steady presence. So it's all about the relationship, and that's what I really hope to bring. We do things like doing some meditation, doing some breathing exercises, all things that help in de-stressing in whatever the issue is, again, to bring clarity.
So it sounds like some of your techniques are unique to you as opposed to some other counseling practices. Are there any other unique approaches that you have that set you apart from other counselors?
I think that finding a right fit for a client is very important. I offer a free client consultation so that someone can come in, we can meet each other, we can talk, they can ask me any questions that they would like to about counseling practice and what it might be like. And through that time together, finding that comfort level, because we are building a partnership where, I'm guide and supporter with their healing and finding, again, where they want to be. So it's very unique, actually, for each and every counselor, for someone to find what fits, where you just really feel, I'm heard. Everyone wants to be heard.
Yeah. So what are some of the signals that people might feel within themselves that's telling them that maybe it's time for counseling? How do they know when it's time for counseling?
I think it is becoming aware of being at the end of that comfort zone, that the status quo no longer works. Very often we do adopt a lot of coping skills that help us at certain times, certain stages of our development when we need them. But then they sometimes become outmoded and they're not helpful. Right. So it's really saying, I'm feeling lost, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And what I maybe depended on before is not working for me. I need another voice.
I can't do this alone anymore.
Yeah, I can't do it alone anymore. And that's so important.
So what other type of counseling services do you offer?
Well, I offer individual sessions for women in transition, and those transitions might include career transition, aging, retirement, divorce, separation, and grieving, also recovery issues. I also have available, upon request, and if I have enough to fill a group sessions. And so that's what I offer to clients. I usually meet with clients once a week. Sometimes after a time of therapy, if we're at a point where the therapy shows that a client is ready to do with a little less, we can go to every other week. And sometimes at the end of therapy, clients might still want to have a once a month check-in, just for that added support.
So is there a typical or average length of time that someone might be in counseling? I'm sure it differs for everyone.
It does differ for everyone. And that's part of the relationship that I've been talking about, that it's part of what I discuss with clients, and we talk about it, and we talk about what they feel their readiness is, and what I'm feeling their readiness is, or I might be able to raise some points to them in terms of, well, gee, have you thought of this or that? Sometimes in the case of, say, I'll go back to the widow that I was talking about, and that feeling that, the first waves of grief had, gotten a little bit less and a little bit more of a return to life, but not quite entering back into life, and thinking, maybe it's time to come less or not come as often, and then realizing, well, I'm in a different stage where, oh, can I allow some of the joys of life that I previously had? Does this make me feel disloyal to my spouse who's died? Is it okay? Is it okay to laugh again, to be happy again? And that's, having someone to discuss that is very, very important, because there are ongoing issues in loss, and that happens in divorce too.
Sure.
Lots of different issues of trying to find what is that new life.
So how does a person know, or maybe you know as their counselor, when they're ready to end their counseling sessions? What are some of those signs that you look
Yeah,
for?
I think some of the signs are an inner comfort and a feeling of wholeness and groundedness in, what they're doing, and how they're feeling a whole life balance to navigate, their lives. Also having a new sense of their resiliency and their coping skills, that they have some tools that maybe they didn't have before that they can rely on. And we talk about it and say, okay, maybe you want to give that a try and see what happens.
We touched a little while ago on some of the emotions involved in counseling, and some of them are big emotions: grief, loss, anger. How do you deal with those in a counseling session?
It really is, first of all, allowing them. Again, creating the space for these emotions. So if someone is angry, allowing that anger and being with them in the anger. Where do they feel that anger in their body? And what can they send to that anger? What kind of compassion can they send? Or to their grief, to their sense of loss. And so it really is very powerful and it is very emotional.
Yeah.
But it's really allowing that, because that way you allow the emotions to pass through rather than stuffing them away, where they just kind of lie in wait.
Yeah.
They fester and become something that can explode because we haven't dealt with them. And they are very important for us.
They can have a negative impact in so many areas of our lives.
Yes, they can.
Yeah,
They can.
Sometimes without us even realizing.
Yes, absolutely.
Others notice it sometimes before we do.
Yeah. Well, we bring that with us. We might bring that with us to work, into our families, into our relationships, or we might even bring it into the way we're living, becoming isolating ourselves, because we don't have those skills to be with people, as we're too wrapped up in those emotions.
So what kind of feedback do you get from your clients? Sounds like, I'm sure it's all positive.
I hope so. I hope so. I think my clients do tell me that they feel much calmer at the end of sessions, which is a good thing. Again, that's their place to be able to express what they're feeling.
You do have a very calming presence.
Yeah, there's a calming presence. We have moments of humor, which I think are just very therapeutic and very helpful.
Sure.
They also tell me that very often during the week, they'll say, well, I heard your voice in my head, that they are able to take our conversations and take their learning with them out into their world and say, I had this moment where I could have gone into this old enabling behavior and taken on somebody else's job or work or responsibility. And I heard your voice. And I went, it's not mine. And so I don't need to take that on, and I don't need to be overwhelmed by it, because I took on something that was not mine. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So it's really a very sacred partnership and relationship.
Have you ever had a client who comes to you thinking that they're ready for counseling and ready to open up, but then you find that when you're with them, you're having a difficult time sort of drawing those emotions out and getting them to talk about their feelings? How do you handle something like that? How do you help someone bring those emotions to the surface and deal with them?
Yeah. It's a very good question, and it does happen. And part of it is kind of putting that out on the table and exploring what the fears are. You know, what they're afraid of if they are to touch an emotion. It might be looking at childhood messages that they hold in a very deep, deep place that's been hidden, but they kind of access in the way they live their lives. And so bringing the connection to that. So it is readiness, and it's also going slowly and saying, okay, well, you know, where do you feel that you're ready to go? Where, what would make a difference to you in helping you access that emotion? Sometimes also you can access things through other parts of their lives where if they feel passionate and fulfilled in their work lives and might describe something that they've done. Oh, how did you feel about that? You know, what happened? And so, you know, that's a wonderful entrance. Or perhaps it's what happened in family or personal relationships. So it's finding the entrance.
Yeah. Do clients sometimes end their sessions with you prematurely? And how do you handle that?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And what happens is that sometimes clients may come in with a situational piece. They're getting laid off, or they're getting divorced, or whatever is happening for them. And digging beneath the surface to explore some of how those things happened, their approach to those things, gets very, very frightening. And sometimes they're just not ready to look at. I think very often in the case of divorce, it is very painful. Divorce is really a loss,
It is a loss, yeah.
with no funeral, with a really difficult part of letting go. And looking at some of the things underneath that happened. And not just the situational things, but what the relationship was made of, what were maybe warning signs, or what someone gravitated to in terms of looking for the kind of relationship that maybe was emphasizing their own self-view, their own negative self-view.
Yeah.
That can be very frightening. And so if you've kind of hit kind of that nerve, a client may say, I think I'm ready to stop.
Sometimes it's easier to run away.
Yeah,
face,
and it is running away. But, you know, I talk about it, and then I say, well, you know, that is your decision. And then my door is always open. And so should you feel the need and want to go further and feel ready to go further,
Then we
my
can do
door
that.
is open.
Okay, great. So what final thoughts would you like to share with us today about yourself or your practice?
Well, that Women Reshaping Lives is about finding that new beginning. My logo is the butterfly. And I love the symbolism of it, that we're in our cocoon and But then as we journey through that cocoon, we can emerge with wings to fly. And that hopefully I provide that support for transformative change.
Excellent. This has been delightful, Susan. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lisa Gray, Executive Director with the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce, and my guest today has been Susan Levine, Counselor with Women Reshaping Lives. Thank you for joining us today.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.